Hey now, it's Sharon, and I'm back to share another idea on how to reform the police. If you're new to the channel, I'm a retired detective. I worked for 20 years for a southeastern city in the US, and I was also in the military. I'm sharing my experiences and my perspective, along with ideas, if you will, on how to reform the police because of what I saw, uh, experienced myself, and talked with other agencies, individuals within other agencies, and we kind of had some of the same issues. So I see some of the problems now, and I'm sharing my ideas on how to reform or retool policing. And with that being said, I remember when I went to basic training in the 90s, I had a friend of mine who had just went through maybe 2 or 3 years earlier. And I spoke to her about it, and the advice that she gave me was for basic training. She said there's going to be a lot of yelling, a lot of confusion. You're not going to be able to do anything right for the first 2 weeks. And that's only because they're breaking you down to build you back up. I'm summarizing, of course. And that helped me so much because when I went through basic training, I was a little older than most recruits. And it was, can I say, maybe traumatizing to some degree? But I held it in the back of my mind. They're just doing this to remold me, make me a better person, all that stuff. And it got me through it. Fast forward to getting into policing a couple of years later, and I wish I knew an officer that I could actually speak to from that agency that could tell me, okay, anticipate this is what's going to happen. But I didn't. I went through recruit training, and it was similar to the Army and basic training. And so what I'm offering right now is a couple of ideas to the individual who's thinking about getting into policing. And it's nothing to do with the yelling and screaming. I don't even know if they still do that or not. But before you get into policing, ask yourself the question, how do I see other folks? I happen to be brown. How do I see brown people? How do I see white people? How do I see Hispanic people, Asian people? And if you can't see them individually and equally, then you might want to back up a little bit and do some volunteering in these communities that you might have an issue with, and get yourself some research and maybe come into policing then. But how do you see those individuals? And you really have to answer that question, because policing, you're going to encounter different groups, different ethnicities, beliefs than yours. How do you see those folks? And if you can't treat them equally, or you have some biased ideas, don't get into policing. Or at least go get educated, okay? The second question I would ask is, how do you see yourself? Kind of ties into the first question. How do you see yourself? Are you above everyone? Are you better than everyone? Do you have an arrogance about you that I'm sure people have told you? Is that a problem, an issue every time you enter into a situation? How do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as not knowing a lot, or someone who needs help with emotional things? You get emotional too many times, or you let your emotions lead you? You got to ask yourself these questions, because that doesn't have a place in policing. Another question I think I would ask, I mentioned this in another video. Do you know the history of policing? And it's funny, because when I was teaching as an instructor in the academy, the question came up about policing history and how it ties back to slave catching. And there was a couple of people that were like, oh my gosh, I tell the story in another video. But if you don't know the history of a thing that you're getting into, why are you getting into it? There's nothing wrong with looking back at the past, that history, and learning from it, basically. And that's all you need to know, is learn from it. Okay, this is how it happened. Okay, whatever your career path is, if you want to be chief, you still need to know the history. If you just want to be a detective and get there after the crime is over to solve it, you still need to know the history. And a lot of people kind of shy away from that. And in the story of policing, the story is only true if you have a complete and accurate knowledge of it. So know the history of policing. And I think those are the three things I would just say before you get into policing. How do you see other people? How do you see yourself? And knowing the history of policing. If you can ask yourself and honestly answer the first two questions and legitimately get into the history of policing all the way up to the present, you're way ahead of everybody else that steps in and into policing and just wants to go with it. You're way ahead of them. Trust me, you're way ahead of them, because when it comes to moving up in rank and supervising and getting into different areas and different ethnicities and different cultures, you will have a head start if you ask yourself those questions, because asking and answering those questions will help you learn how to navigate supervisory positions when it comes to supervising others, and then going into areas and communities where there are a diverse number of people. I promise you it will, especially knowing the history. And that's all I want to share. I'll have more next week. Take a look at our online store. The link is in the description. I created some notebooks, some activity books. The links for those are in the description. And always remember, you don't necessarily have to go through a thing to learn from it. Talk to you guys later. Bye.